Hi, I'm Dr. Mitch Harlan, and welcome to the Truth Talks podcast. Today's podcast, I'm here with Gary Scott. Gary, how are you?
I'm doing great, thanks. Good to see you.
Oh, it's great to see you. We're longtime friends. We've been friends for a long, long time, and I have the most unbelievable respect for what you've done and also who you are as a character. And we're going to try and wrap all that up into one podcast. So I'm just going to start out. I'm going to give you a couple things to our listeners so that you don't have to say it yourself. But you were a world record holder of the fastest ascent of Mount McKinley, 18 and a half hours.
That's correct. First one-day ascent.
Yeah, that in of itself is insane. You've been on Mount Everest. Everybody knows about Mount Everest. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We'll talk a little bit about the death zone. You're going to share your personal story of 2003. We're going to hit your right path adventures, what you do for a living. And there's an old saying that says when you're doing what you love, you never work a day in your life. That's pretty much the world of Gary Scott. Is that correct?
I feel very fortunate and blessed to, yes, be living the life I'm living.
This is just going to be awesome because ever since the day I met you and I knew you were doing all the Everest stuff, I couldn't get enough conversation with you. And God, I don't even know how long it's been. 20 years at least, right?
Yeah, I would think so.
It's been we had darker hair,
Yeah,
both of us.
more of it. Yeah.
Although you're still in amazing shape. You just keep yourself in amazing shape, don't you?
I work on it. Yeah. During, I was 6 months in Australia, and during the lockdown, we had this wonderful park next door, and I would take the families who I was staying with, their dog, for a good hard, hour and a half walk every day. And yeah, so I work on it for sure.
The dog's like, who the hell got me this dog walker, man? Are you serious right now?
He'd be in my room every day at 3 o'clock, nudging me to get out there. He loved it.
Dude, you just have the most incredible life. Lead us down the journey that made you this incredible mountaineer and just this whole dream that you live.
Well, really, it started when I was, my father was in the military and a diplomat. And when I was 6, we came across to the US for a year, traveled around. We went to the Canadian Rockies. And I remember paddling out on Lake Louise with my father, and I looked up and I saw mountains for the first time. I'd grown up in a pretty flat area of Australia. And I asked him a couple of questions, and I turned to him and I said, I'm going to be a mountain climber. He was never really happy about my climbing. He wanted me to focus more on school. But I went to boarding school, and fortunately, they let me go out almost every weekend bushwalking. And they had an adventure group. And then my father was sent to Pakistan near the Himalayas. And so I got to see the Himalayas and hike with the British ambassador just got into technical rock climbing. And I was out rock climbing every weekend. And then, went to university for a while, dropped out of that, did 3 years full-time rock climbing, 6-7 days a week, reaching the highest levels in Australia. And then I knew it was time to hit the mountains. And I saved up for a year, worked 2 jobs back to back, and bought a one-way ticket to Kathmandu. And I hopped on the plane with a backpack, a passport, a one-way ticket to Kathmandu, and $10,000. And I joke that I'm still on that same trip. Went to Nepal, hiked to Everest Base Camp by myself, which was an incredible adventure. Fell in love with the Sherpas, fell in love with Nepal, and I started working for a British company, and then started my own trekking company and taking people up peaks. Came to the US, arrived in LAX with $23. And a backpack, and started working for some of the best guiding schools in the US, in California in the summers, teaching ice climbing in New Hampshire in the winters, doing my own climbing in between, and then taking groups to Nepal every fall. And that went on for quite a few years.
Man, that's what I loved about your story and why I was so attracted to it, because you have been everywhere. I remember you had a Land Cruiser. I don't even know how many miles that thing must have had on it, because you were all over the U.S. all the time. You were always gracious enough to stop by, have dinner with us, have some drinks with us, and I just loved your stories, man. I loved your stories, mainly because of the accent, though. Without the accent, I don't know if it'd be the same. I don't know if it'd be the same story, but I've always loved that Australian accent.
Well,
But
thanks.
that is such a cool adventure. I mean, I think now even more than ever is I just had this conversation with my son. He's starting college, and it's kind of that. I think I know what I want to do, and man, I've even changed my outlook on life. Like, I was that trained generation where you got out of school, you went on to college, you found a job that you thought you may want to do, studied for it, end up getting out and just kind of work that job until you get old and done. And well, Gary Scott didn't take that road.
Not at all. My father was 40 years military, and he had a set course. And at one point he said, Gary, you've always just done what you wanted to do, and you got away with it. And interestingly enough, I was talking with my wife Katerina's son, who's 25, and just yesterday, and I said, it's a really good thing to write down and think about, and most people don't think about it. Where do you want to be in 10 years? Where do you want to be in 5 years? What do you want your life to look like? And where do you want to be in 1 year? And now that we're coming to the end of this year, a very interesting year, it's a great exercise just to sit down, grab a cup of coffee, and think about where do you want to be in 1 year, and what do you have to do in the next 3, 6, 9 months to get there. And it's a roadmap for your life. And I did that. And some of my friends, it was interesting going back to Australia, where I was just there for 6 months and meeting with some of my old school buddies, excuse me, some who I hadn't seen for 40 years. And they said, and some of them were really successful and business owners and wealthy and farm owners. And they said, we'd talk about you, and some of us were envious because we were stuck, and yes, we were successful, but you were off seeing the world and following your dreams. And I always talked about those things, but that I wanted to climb in the Himalayas. But I guess for whatever reason, I ended up doing those things. And yeah, I look back and I'm proud of the fact that I went for it, and that feels
Man,
good.
did you go for it? You went all in. Just give everybody kind of a taste of where you've been.
I spent a lot of time in Nepal, done over 40 treks in Nepal, lived there for a while, ran my own trekking and climbing company, traveled all through the US. I've climbed in, Mexico, the volcanoes, Alaska, 3 trips, been to Africa, climbed all through Europe and hiked a lot in Europe. And then, found the Dolomites 10 years ago and have spent a lot of time there. And it's interesting though, because there's places that I haven't been. I never climbed, I've been to Patagonia in South America, but I never climbed in Peru. And it hit me one day that, well, maybe that trip or those mountains would have been one too many, because I'm very fortunate. I've lost a lot of friends, 30, 35 friends in the Himalayas and other places climbing around the world. I've still got all my fingers and toes, never had a major injury, never had a client have an injury with me, knock on wood. And I'm very careful and meticulous. I sometimes think, oh gosh, it would have been great to climb the north face of the Eiger. Well, maybe the north face of the Eiger would have killed me,
Yeah.
So I feel good about the places I've been, and there's a lot of places I haven't been, but I feel fortunate that I've spent, and I spend more times in the places that I love. So, and I preferred to get to know a place really well, like Nepal, and speak the language and, develop relationship there. And same with Dolomites, than getting to know everywhere. Yeah. So I feel very fortunate to have gone to the places I've gone to and to have done the things I've done. And I try not to regret the things I haven't.
I tell you what, I want to go into because I'm going to circle back around to the Dolomites because we're going to bring that up when we talk about your Rise Path Avengers. Everybody in Everest is the intrigue of everyone, right? I think most people would probably say that is the pinnacle, the ultimate. You got a story about 2003.
Sure. and let me back up from that. I talked about seeing the mountains at the age of 6. By the age of 8, I found out that Mount Everest was the highest mountain on earth, and it was my goal to climb it. I was in boarding school by 10, and we had, fortunately, a huge selection of books on climbing and mountaineering. So I just poured over them. I was a terrible student, but if I was, had an exam in climbing history, I would have got an A plus. And so I read all about these expeditions. And one of my heroes was Reinhold Messner, who happens to be from the Dolomites, who was the first person to climb Mount Everest without supplemental oxygen. And that sort of gave me a benchmark and something to shoot for. So Everest was always my goal. And I took a long-term approach to it. I was into climbing and going to Everest before all this, the guided trips. And so I went and I climbed a 15,000 foot mountain. Then I climbed an 18,000 foot mountain. Then I went to Denali. And then I went, so I worked my way up difficulty and height, and just did very well at altitude, was, gifted athletically and physiologically, and also trained very hard. You're in Colorado. I lived in Colorado Springs. And before I went to Everest, I was basically running up and down Pikes Peak twice a week through the winter. So I'd worked my way up. I was teaching ice climbing in New Hampshire, and I was invited to go to Everest in 91, which was a near fatal trip for me. I was caught out in a horrendous snowstorm at 26,000 feet in the death zone by myself, and was very lucky to get off the mountain. And then I had about 10 years where I really I got married, and I climbed the corporate ladder, and so I put climbing aside, guiding aside, and then I got invited to go back in 2003 and help a guy who had one arm, and we co-led 27 people with various disabilities into Everest Base Camp, which was very humbling and unbelievable. We had 5 guys in wheelchairs, and then him and I, we had a client each. We went up the mountain, and during that time, I was feeling great, moving well. But on our summit day, I had another day from hell, which I'm really fortunate to have survived.
So this death zone that you talk about, this is at 26,000 feet. From what I've read, you have 48 hours, or you're done. This is where like everybody dies. Is that correct?
Yeah, and the death zone basically means that altitude where, and even at base camp at 18,000 feet, your body's dying, your body's not regenerating, you're going backwards, you're not sleeping very well, you're not eating very well, cuts don't heal, and your body's being deprived of oxygen. So as you go up, it just gets progressively worse. And the death zone is an area where most people just aren't thinking very well, because lack of oxygen to the brain affects your brain. So the point of the death zone is that if you make a mistake, you could die.
Yeah.
And that's the whole thing. That's why it's called the death zone. So
And
adding to the fact that most people, 99% of people use uh, supplemental oxygen, and most people start using it at Camp 3, which is at 23,000 feet. They get there, they turn it on, they sleep with it. It lets you sleep better. It helps your body recover, and it warms your body. And I wanted to climb Everest without supplemental oxygen.
because with oxygen, it's not hard enough.
Well, it's hard, but here's the thing. Here's how we look at it, and not taking anything away from people that climb it with oxygen. I think it's
Sure.
fantastic. But I wanted to climb a 29,000 foot Mount Everest. And Mount Everest, if you use oxygen, is not 29,000 feet. It's
That's true.
26 or it's 25 or it's 24. And I knew I could climb that high without supplemental oxygen. So for me, I wanted to see how far Gary Scott could go by natural means, by not putting an oxygen tank on. And people had done it. Reinhold Messner did it first, and a elite group of climbers. And I wanted to see how I did against them. And there's a hill that you, on the way to base camp, which is about 3,000 feet ascent, goes from 14 to 18 and a half. And Messner had the record of going up it in like 45 minutes. And at one point I went up and I did it in 44 minutes and 35 seconds. And so I knew I was in that league of and with my speed ascent of Denali, which was a record that stood for 27 years, and the person that supposedly broke the record has been disputed by a lot of people. And he knew, equipment had changed in 27 years too.
Just even talking about that boot that I have, that thing's heavier than hell.
Oh, they're very heavy. But anyway, so I got invited back to Everest, and I was feeling great. And to go back, that's why I wanted to see if I could do it by natural means, by fair means. And to me, I'd rather fail. I wanted to see where was my limit. How far could I go where I'd need to stop and turn back? And I just did really well. I just felt great. Um, and I moved well and I breathed well and I was thinking clearly. But you talked about, yeah, but you don't want to be at the death zone for 48 hours. Well, I was in the death zone for 60 hours without oxygen, without a sleeping bag. And there's a whole lot of, interestingly enough, there's politics on mountains. And our expedition leader didn't feel like going up on the day. You get there in the afternoon and you basically wait a few hours and then put on your oxygen and go up and come back down and get the hell out of the death zone as quickly as possible. That's the whole idea. And especially for me, because I wasn't using oxygen. But he got into camp late and was tired and didn't want to go up that day. And I was like, dude, I gotta go. And he was very convincing and kind of laid a guilt trip on me and said, we've done this together and I really want you to be with me and I want you to take care of me and, get me to the top. And so I was like, okay. And so, but the whole next day, so you're sitting around doing nothing. And meanwhile, my sleeping bag got lost somewhere. So I didn't have a sleeping bag. I'm not on oxygen. We had crappy food. And so you're just going downhill, fast. And the whole next day we didn't go for some other reason, which I can't even remember. And so finally we're deciding, okay, we're going to go. And I'm sleeping in the Sherpa tent, which is just crap everywhere. And I'm like super clean, super tidy, everything organized. And this was just in disarray. And I actually said, I probably should use oxygen. And I remember they had one extra bottle, and we got out of the tent. It was like chaos because now, when I first went in '91, there was 100 people on the mountain. When I got back there in 2003, there was 150 tents at the high camp at 26,500 feet. It was like, how the hell do you find your tent? Because there are all these orange North Face domes. Anyway, so we get out of the tent and everyone's, headlamps and there's people walking around and it's very confusing and the wind's blowing and the snow's blowing. And I put on this oxygen mask and I couldn't breathe. I couldn't, I got big lungs. I needed more, it was impeding my breathing. So I put it back in the tent. Anyway, there was 5 Sherpas with us and most of the time they climbed with this other guy. He had one arm. They were helping him. And I said, all I want this whole trip, I'd co-led 27 people to with handicaps to base camp. I did 4 rescues running up and down the mountain, helping people off the mountain. I served, which I like to do. And I took care of a lot of stuff. And I said, all I want is one Sherpa to be with me on summit day in case something goes wrong. I carried my own stuff up the mountain. I was the first person out of everyone at base camp to be up certain camps. I was doing good. I was feeling good. So anyway, we start taking off and we get across this flat section it's called the South Col, and we start going up and you clip into these ropes. You don't even use an ice axe on Everest anymore. You clip into these ropes the whole way.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm with this other guy and I help him get clipped in and I'm like, where's the Sherpas? This is like Super Bowl day and where's your team? It's like, this is it. Where are they? So he said, and he's got an oxygen mask on. He's got goggles on. You got these big coats. So the communication's not that great. Anyway, we start moving and you're just moving up. And I was, after a few hours getting frustrated because I wasn't moving at my pace. I wasn't in my zone. I wasn't, in this Zen-like trance I can get in and just move at the right pace for me. And I was taking care of him. Every time you got to the end of the rope, I'd have to have him unclip and reclip. And I was just super frustrated because where the hell are the Sherpas? Which I didn't really find out why years later. But we're moving up. So we're going for 6-8 hours, right? It's freezing cold. My feet are frozen. My toes are frozen. And one of the biggest issues with climbing without oxygen is losing fingers and toes because the oxygen is not getting to your extremities and not heating it up. With oxygen, you can crank that up and you feel quite warm. And there was a point where one of the Sherpas kind of caught up to us. And, you're going through a lot in your mind because there's not much else to think about. And I just thought, okay, we've got a long way to go. My feet are already frozen. This is not a good day. And this is life and death.
Yeah.
And, it was my second trip on Everest. I'd spent 6 months and like most mountaineers, you have this love-hate relationship with it. It's not romantic like people think. It's miserable. It's suffering. It's uncomfortable. It's horrible most of the time. It's not, jumping over crevasses with the sun with your ice axe. It's really uncomfortable and really not fun. It gets really cold at night. There's nothing to do. And I'm insomniatic. I don't sleep. So, and you might get to your tent, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And, or sometimes we'd climb at night because it was safer. So you get to your tent at 8 o'clock. There's nowhere to go, nothing to do. You don't go for a jog. You're in your tent all day. You're in your tent all that night. There's only so much food you can eat, which is freeze dried anyway. And then if there's a storm the next day, you're in your tent that whole next day, that whole next night. Well, there might be a storm for a week. And so it's very mentally tough. And one of the biggest attributes you need in Himalayan mountaineering is patience, just patience. Anyway, so, and I had already vowed I'll never come back to Everest again. And I really want to climb it this time, get it done, get it over with, and go home. And, so we're on this very steep slope on a rope, pitch black. You're clipped in. He's in front of me. I'm helping him. The Sherpas catch up. And, I'm thinking about this, but I make the decision today's not the day. Today's not the day. And so I'm giving up this dream of, 35 years, my life goal. And I was 1,000 feet from the top. And some people say, they hear people turn around 200 feet from the top. Well, why don't you just go up and tag? It's hours and hours. And they say that a footstep above the death zone is equal to the effort required to walking a mile at sea level. So, and I was taking, and imagine this, I was counting my breaths because I wanted to stay in sync and not, because you take a step and you got to really sort of muster up the strength to take another step. And so I would take one step and then I'd take a breath and then I'd take another step. Well, I realized because of the altitude, I needed to take more breaths. So there's one point where I was taking one step, and probably a 6-8 inch step, and taking 7 breaths before taking the next one. And you counted because you didn't want to be there forever, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like working out. You're going to do a certain amount. So it's one step and then step. And I've had friends that have told me, they've counted up to 30. And so just the effort of breathing is a tremendous amount of effort. I'm getting hypoxic just thinking about it. And so I realized that today wasn't the day. And so I made the decision to turn around. And the other Sherpas were there so they could take care of this guy who went on to get to the summit with these 4 Sherpas' help. And I turned around and immediately all my adrenaline left me. I'd been 60 hours in the death zone, no oxygen, not eating well. And my whole body just, collapsed basically. And I had to go to the bathroom, which is often the case in Nepal at the best of times. And, there was nowhere to go. I couldn't unclip from the rope. I'd fall off the edge of the mountain. It was a hell of a long way down to any flat spot. I had this one-piece down suit on. I got a harness on. There's people coming up, people going down. And I just thought, okay, I'm just going to go in my pants, which was, I didn't have a choice, but it was a mistake. So it was very watery and went all the way down my pants and the back of my legs and everywhere else. And
That's not the boot I have, right?
I hate to break it to you, mate, but yes, that's one reason I gave it away. But
that's been to my kid's school for show and tell. Oh God! Now Mindy's gonna be like, "You need to be getting rid of that damn boot."
No, we did wash it afterwards. But
so let me ask you this. Did your body quit or did your mind quit first?
Well, mentally, I made the decision to turn around, not physically, because before that, my breathing was good. I was thinking well, and you're thinking about how you're thinking.
Yeah.
And I realized, no, I've got all my senses. My breathing's good. I felt good. And I really, truly believe I could have gone on and got to the top of Everest without supplemental oxygen. Now, a lot of people do that and they die on the way down, they collapse, or they get frostbite and lose fingers or toes because, you can't feel anything anymore. And, there's what they call summit fever, where people go on beyond what they should do. Happens in Colorado on the 14ers. People, and I've always known it was okay to turn around, and I've always followed my gut. And there's times when I've been on mountains where it's a beautiful day and I just go, Gary, it's not the right day, turn around. And I never second guess it. Where I've been hiking up 14ers with people in Colorado and we turned around because of the weather and they're just so disappointed. And I'm like, it's a day trip, man. You'll always be there.
You come back.
It's just a hill, don't worry about it.
I don't know if you saw my hand moving over there, but I was actually scratching out climbing Mount Everest.
There you go.
None of that seemed Like a great idea to me.
You know, and at one point it was a great mountain, but the last 10 years it's a circus and it's really become a horrible, horrible situation because of many reasons.
One of the things when I was doing the research, though, it was talking about I mean, a significant amount of bodies that are up there because you can't get them down, right?
Right. Right. Yeah, right outside our tent at High Camp, there was a body right there. And should I continue with this story?
Yeah, keep going.
Okay, so I'm coming down. I run into a Sherpa that's in distress, very close to me, and we make the decision to go down together. And on the way down, every step's agony. I'm freezing. I got crap down my legs. My stomach's in knots. My throat's super dry. My lips are chapped. Um, and I fall in a crevasse. He falls in a crevasse. We get down to the South Call, the high camp, Camp 4. I go to my tent. I'm just staggering. Open the tent door, and there's a pool of blood in the tent. And there's a Sherpa, one of our Sherpas in there, who was throwing up blood, and it looked like bile. And I was like, oh my gosh, great. And I said, we need to get out of here. We need to get you out of here quickly. So I said, get ready. I'm going to go to this other tent. And I was just so parched and dry, had nothing to eat for 12 hours, nothing to drink. So you're super dehydrated. We go to this other tent. It's trashed. The thought of, and people talk about doing marathons and triathlons, and I've done marathons and triathlons, but the 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 effort in mountaineering, I think, is far where surpasses that. The idea of reaching down and untying a shoelace is just more than you can bear, and uh, so I go to this other tent and there's no pots that are clean. And the thought of just going over and chipping ice and coming back and putting it in a dirty pot to make some water. I don't have any spare clothes there. So, I take off. Luckily the sun was out and it was kind of warm inside the tent. So I hate to be graphic, but I'm trying to scrape off crap off the back of my legs with a knife and just putting I don't think I cried, but I put my head in my hands. It was just going, oh my god, this is horrible. And um and I went back to the tent. He wasn't in any better shape, but we got him up. I gave him the one oxygen bottle that we left behind, and we took off, and he could move faster than me on oxygen. And we caught up a few times, but I was just coming down the mountain and people were coming up and they were looking at me and my skin was all peeled off. And they were like, dude, are you okay? Because I look like death. And then we caught up to each other and I helped him basically down the mountain. We got to Camp 2, spent the night there. Next day, left for Camp 1, and it was in the ice fall that and he was doing okay that night, and we had him on oxygen again. And then in the ice fall, he collapsed and died. And so then, we had this horrendous rescue to get him down through that 3,000 feet, 1 mile of crushed ice and crevasses. And I spent one night at base camp. And I flew with the body back to Kathmandu and met with his family, went to the funeral, and they actually thanked me. He's Buddhist and he was a Lama, holy man. And they said, if you hadn't brought his body back down, we thank you for doing that, because now we can burn his body and he can be reincarnated. But if you'd left him on the mountain, that wouldn't have been possible. So after a lot of, thought about it, I know, I did the right thing, and I can sleep well and look in the mirror and say, I did the right thing. And I can, under duress, I can feel good about my decisions.
Which is kind of an awesome segue into the writing of your book, Summit Strategies. And one of the coolest things about that book is that was done. It was a 2003. Is that right? Is that when you wrote the book?
Correct. Actually, right before I left on that trip.
Yeah. And what's crazy about it is, when does it become the most relevant? And you always think it's right when you write it, right? This is the most relevant time. Now, Summit Strategies is more relevant than it probably ever was when you wrote the book. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and that's humbling for you to say that, and it makes me think I probably need to read it again because I kind of wrote it for myself, for my own personal development, and during that time I'd read a lot of self development and personal development type books, and it was kind of a culmination where I wanted to write down my experiences, but what I'd learned from those experiences and perhaps how people could apply those lessons into their lives.
The relevancy behind Summit Strategies and What Your Everest for me was, we all have our own mountain to climb. And it may be 26,000, 29,000, may only be 10,000 feet, but you still got to climb your mountain. You've got to succeed in whatever that is. And so, man, your book has been very relevant in my world for quite some time now. And for that purpose, because I don't believe we all have the 29,000 mountain to climb, right? I don't think everybody's got that same mountain, but so I do. I reference that all the time, and I think now more than ever that book is more relevant.
Wow. Thanks. Thanks for saying that. And that's really humbling. But yeah, I've had a lot of people who have told me, they leave it by their bed at night, and they reference it. And so it's, my goal was that would help people. And so I'm really pumped that, you enjoy it. And I hope a lot of other people do too. And it's a very simple read. It's a good airplane book, and actually, coming up to Christmas, it's a good. Not trying to sell my book, but it's a really good book for young people, especially because to me, it's A to Z on here you are and where do you want to go, and it's steps on how to perhaps dream and plan and execute a goal in life. And yes, not whether it's Everest, but whether it's getting a job or running a marathon or running a 10K or losing weight or whatever it is in life. I think it can help people, give them a bit of a kick, and hey, here's some steps I can take to be more, be the best that I can be. And
It is. I just think it's incredibly relevant. Like, I mean, it was crazy because, again, obviously knowing we were going to do this, I reread it, and it is. It's just so relevant today. So I encourage everybody to get out and get a copy of that. And it is. It's an easy read, and and that's another reason why I loved it. There was nothing more, nothing less than this is what it is, and it was an incredible book. That was a great job. I can't end this, though, until I give one more plug for your Right Path Adventures. Tell us about Right Path Adventures.
uh, well, it's really another dream come true. I'd been a professional mountain guide, and I was taking people up big mountains for many years, which is a hard job. It's very stressful. People pay you to be 100% successful. They pay you to get to the top of the mountain. And as I said, mountaineering in the best of times is very uncomfortable, very stressful. But when you've got a group of clients, who you are looking at you, and you've got all the different personalities, and you're with them for weeks on end, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, through their highs and their lows and their disappointments and their victories. And it's very satisfying, but also very stressful. And as I was getting older too, I just found I enjoyed creature comforts and not sleeping in a tent, not freezing my butt off. And I started going back to Europe, and just love the culture, and sleeping in a warm bed and eating great food and being able to drink wine and a beer and not worry about altitude. And I had this idea of when I hit 50, I spent some time thinking about what do I want to do with the next 50 years of my life. And I realized, and I sat down with a pen and a paper and sticky pads, and I wrote down everything that I liked doing and that I was good at doing. And I kind of just would move them around and think about it. And I thought, yeah, I do want to stay in the travel business, but I want to do something that's with smaller groups and perhaps making an impact in their lives. But I didn't have a place because Nepal was hard and it's such a long way. And then I went to it's amazing how it happens. I went to a travel show, picked up a magazine. There was an article about the Dolomites, and I'd read about the Dolomites when I was 14 years old back in boarding school because it's a big climbing area. And I decided to plan a trip there and went over and fell in love with the place and spent a month there going to these different places, did a lot of research. And I thought, man, if I love this place, people are going to love it. And it just has this amazing combination of incredible scenery. It's safe, it's clean, it's friendly, not a lot of people there, incredible hiking, incredible food, incredible accommodation. I'm spoiled for life, and a lot of people I take there say they're spoiled for life too. And the hotel owners were saying, Gary, there's nobody doing what you're doing. And so it was just cool. And so I was there all summer. When I didn't have people, I would explore. And I named my business Right Path because I wanted to keep my clients on the right path, but also to be on the right path myself, to always do the right thing, and to to help people find their right path. And just like you talk, so it's kind of a continuation of the Everest thing, where everyone's Everest is different and everyone's path is different. And so my goal, and I feel like I'm an intuitive guide, is to help people find the path for them. And people are worried that they'll come on these trips and it's going to be too hard for them or they're too slow. But I'm really, really good at knowing how to slow people down, how to get people to enjoy the scenery. And I've had 8-year-olds and 89-year-olds and people of every size, shape, fitness level, experience level. And I know the walks to take them on and how to get them to enjoy it. So finding the right path for people is where kind of the name came from.
And how does someone get a hold of you to get booked on one of these trips?
Well, I just launched a new website like a week ago. So rightpathadventures with an s.com. And I'm now doing trips to the Lake District in northern Italy, the Dolomites, Croatia and Slovenia. I love, and I've spent a lot of time there. And I spend a lot of time exploring off the beaten path places and talk to the locals where they go, where they eat, where they stay. And people have called my Croatia and Slovenia trip Gary's Magical Mystery Tour because I don't tell people a whole lot. I don't send out itineraries. And I get a lot of people who come back on trips and they just say, hey, we've got 10 days, just take us. And they trust me because they know we're going to stay at great places, eat great food, have a great time, do some great walks. Um, so now, yeah, we go to Croatia, Slovenia, Slovakia, and the Dolomites. And I've been based in the Dolomites during the summer for many years. But I think even now with the travel situation, I don't know. I might, I'm building a little cabin here in Slovakia. I might base myself here and kind of go off and take groups. So small groups. I have a 9-seater van and sometimes have 2 people, sometimes have 4, sometimes have 6. I take families, I take groups of friends, 4 couples, and so it's just I love it.
I'll give you a great plug. This was the most amazing thing ever. My office manager, her father he had climbed pretty much all the 14ers or close to, and obviously he had that dream of Everest, and I know him extremely well. And one of the things that was crazy is I said, call Gary, and you took him to base camp 1 of Everest, and to this day the man talks about it every day of his life.
Yeah, Mike's an amazing guy and one of those sort of perfect guests, just always enthusiastic, always positive. He was a delight to go with, and just wonderful. And yeah, I know it made a huge difference in his life, and he was really proud of himself. And that's one thing I enjoy as a guide, to help people get out of their comfort zone and to be able to do things and go places they never thought they could go. And I've, taken people on hikes that they thought, well, I never would have done that on my own. And so that's part of my job as a guide. And Mike's a great example of that, as someone who had the goal. He had some hard times, as everyone does on the trek. Um, and he was no spring chicken when he went, and he had some problems with his knees, but he was a trooper. And I always remember Mike. One funny story about Mike, if I could just throw it in. So we're camping, right? And next door to us is a yak field. And I remember going over to clean my teeth, and I said to the group, we were a really tight group, and everyone was listening. And at breakfast, I said, maybe we should have. And we had a toilet tent, right, where everyone would go to the bathroom. I said, maybe we should all, have a special spot where we spit out our toothpaste, so not to pollute the land. And Mike said, Gary, we're next to a field full of yak crap, Is it really good? I always just remember that. It was like, yeah, Mike, you're right. A little bit of toothpaste isn't going to matter with all that yak shit.
That's Mike McDonald in a nutshell, is it not?
Yeah. No,
That is so great.
but yeah. And I often visit Mike, when I travel through. And you mentioned road trips. I've driven my Land Cruiser from when I got back from the Dolomites. I drove from San Diego to New York 6 weeks, sleeping in Motel 6s, sleeping on friends' couches, spreading the gospel about the Dolomites. And back then, a lot of people had never heard of the Dolomites, And
Yeah.
one of the cool things is that it's still kind of unknown. It's still kind of secretive, and I know how to get people off the beaten path so we can walk away from other people. And it is super spectacular. So I was sad not to be there this year, but that's, luckily I've had some good years. And um, I'm hoping that things turn around this next year and we'll all be able to travel again. And I love showing people a great time, and people like to come on my trips so they can relax and just know that, they're going to stay. And people will ask me, what are the hotels like? And I go, they're awesome. If they weren't awesome, we wouldn't stay in them. What's the food like? Unbelievable. I mean, I tell people I only do fabulous. If it's not fabulous, we're not going to do it. So, um, I feel very fortunate to have found this incredible place on Earth, and to be there at the right time, the same year that it became a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and to be able to take people to these incredible places, and have them. And I'm big into getting people into the moment. Hey, we're here in Italy today. We're in the Dolomites. Forget about where you were last week. Forget about where you're going next week. Enjoy this here now.
And I think that's what's beautiful about what you do is you get people to just stop and enjoy that moment. Actually, producer Chad's getting ready to do his first 14er.
Nice.
Yeah, although he's not a young man, and I don't know if he's going to make it to Everest before he dies, but he's going to try a 14er. But brother, I tell you what, thank you so much for coming on our show. I know people are going to love this. I want to encourage everybody to really get that book, because I think it is the most relevant book that's out there right now, and I appreciate you writing that. Anything we can do to help you out, let us know. And producer Chad and I, we're going to try and get our wives hooked up and see if we can't get a trip to the Dolomites whenever that becomes available.
Great couples trip, man.
My great friend Gary Scott, I just can't even tell you how much, again, I appreciate you, and let's always stay in touch, bud. It's been 20 some years, and let's do it till one of us is no longer here.
Right. Well, you're a really important person in my life, Mitch, and congratulations for the show and just what you guys are doing. And I know you're touching a lot of lives in a positive way. And ever since I met you, I knew you were someone different and just a unique guy with a wonderful heart. And I'm just proud of you and what you're doing in the show. So keep it up, man.
Buddy, I appreciate it so much. Thank you again, Gary. I love you, buddy, and you just live your best life.
Love you too, man.
All right, brother. All right, bye-bye.